We continue our Bible study in Ephesians, letter to the Ephesians, chapter 5. We are right around verse 21 today. Before we start, obviously we'll start with our prayer, but I don't normally do this, but I thought maybe it's a good idea to do today. Is there anything people have to pray for, anything people want to bring, particular intentions or things that we should be aware of to pray for that we'll remember in a special way in prayer now and also in our own prayer?
Yeah, people to pray for my 12-year-old grandson, Johnny, who is dealing with seizures and medication, so it's going to be helping at 3 grand mal seizures yesterday, so really scary. For my almost 16-year-old nephew who just broke both wrists in a baseball game yesterday. Yeah, that's huge. And then for a close friend of ours that's just dealing with he just called off his wedding, and so just very emotional.
So for my husband, who's been through 2 spinal surgeries in the last 5 months and is facing some complications now, that he just gets through this and all's good.
I could use some prayers to speed up a letter I've been waiting for in order to get.
Jane, did you have?
Just for the world in general, for peace, I see so much between Russia and Ukraine, in the Middle East, Sudan, Haiti. It's just, there's so much hate out there that the love of Christ will kind of touch their hearts.
The 2 the 2 seminarians are going to be priests in a couple of weeks.
It's a great thing to pray for, yeah. Jocelyn?
For my mother, because she's having a reconstructive surgery June 11th after battling cancer. So she's like very anxious about it. So thank you for your prayers and just have the Blessed Mother comfort her.
I was going to say for that, all our health and our family's health.
Let's pray now in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God and Father, we come before you this day and we bring before you all of these intentions that we have voiced and all of the intentions that we have in the silence of our own hearts. We ask, Lord, that you be close to all those who are in need, bring healing to all those who are sick and suffering, bring them also comfort and consolation, and bring to our world the peace that it so desperately needs, the peace that can come from Christ alone. And we also ask, Lord, that you be with us through your Spirit during this time of reflection. Help guide us to come to a greater understanding of your most holy word through the intercession of St. Paul and of all the saints, as we now pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, I think just 2 things I wanted to mention. One is kind of a housekeeping scheduling thing, which is the next TB Mass. I mentioned I would tell you when that was coming up. I believe it actually is. It's June 11th, so it's the day that you just mentioned, Jocelyn. So that's something to keep in mind. We'll be praying in a special way for that. But so this is for the Sunday ORTV televised Mass, which it would be on the 16th of June, but we're taping it the Tuesday before. So this is Tuesday the 11th at 11 a.m. So if anybody is interested, we had a small group last time for the Bible study, which was nice. If anybody's interested in going, you can just either let me know or send me an email, and we can have you come along as well. If people that came last time are obviously more than welcome to come again. So, and we can have a nice group. So it'll be a similar experience, but obviously it's a Sunday Mass rather than a daily Mass. So, obviously a longer Mass, and we'll have music. We'll have musicians as well from the parish. So if you're interested, it's also the Father's Day Mass, because that Sunday, the 16th, is Father's Day. So maybe I can convince my father to come. We'll see how that happens, but he probably won't want to. But so that's the first thing. And the second thing, I think it's nice to just share positive things. So Pat and I on Sunday were at the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist up in Meriden, and they had 2 sisters who professed their solemn, final vows, which was really excellent to see. And it was a really hot day, but everybody was, I think, really, the heat was really getting to a lot of people present, but we were so joyful about that day. So did you want to say anything about that?
It's a wonderful thing that this community is growing. There are at least 2 or 3 sisters every year who make final vows. They need more than that to keep, in the sense, their community going, because they're probably, with the death, they were part of a bigger community in the 70s and broke off when the order stopped, like the one I was in, prayer and everything, they started this. But these ceremonies, I think, are such an awakening to so many people who come to them.
Mm-hmm.
And the bishop was really,
Mm-hmm.
he was really good, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very inspiring to see
Mm-hmm.
these young women.
Mm-hmm.
You have to finish college with them, which is a really good idea.
Mm-hmm.
When I ended, I was 18 and didn't know anything, but it's beautiful to watch. And I'm glad you were there. I was looking for you.
Yeah, I was a little late, so it wasn't on the altar, but I was hiding in the back. So speaking of that too, another thing to announce would be, and Harriet already mentioned this, would be, so the ordination is coming up. The Catholic transcript, Harriet mentioned that is coming out for this next month, or this month, has their picture in it and it has information, but just so you get a heads up. So that is on June 22nd. So it's a Saturday at 11 a.m. and it's at the cathedral up in Hartford. So if you haven't been to an ordination before, it's a wonderful, just very similar to what we experienced on Sunday.
Late, isn't it? Usually they're done in May.
So the reason
Transition?
it's actually because of, so when there were people studying in Rome, myself included, you wouldn't finish until the end of June. So they pushed the ordination back to the end of June. But you're right. Normally it would be around now. A lot of ordinations are taking place. I mean, it could happen whenever, but generally speaking, it would happen, mid to late May. So I think in the future it's going to be pushed back.
I learned something this week about why it's May. I assumed it's the blessed month of the Blessed Mother, but it's because of the Ember Days, the invocation following, in the,
yeah, and that's kind
finishing up
of
Easter
kept
time.
over.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful time and tradition. So I think in the future it's going to be moved back. Plus, it's just a little bit earlier, meaning you get started earlier, before the summer, because by the time you arrive in your parish in July, and there's there's not a lot going on, so it's nicer to start a little bit earlier. So if you can make it, that's the 22nd of June, Saturday, up at the cathedral. And the 2 that are being ordained are, I think a lot of people here know them or have seen them at Mass and everything. One is from Hamden, so not very far away, and the other is from Orange. So they're both very local people. So.
And Colin's first Mass will be the next day at St. Rita's in Hamden at 4:00.
Yes, and
I don't know when.
Dan's will be at 1:30 at Holy Infant in Orange. So, and that's another great experience to see a priest celebrate his first Mass is really powerful.
You get blessed by them.
Yes,
as well?
yes, and you could go if you we don't normally in Hartford, we normally don't do it after the ordination. They usually do it at their receptions, but after the first Mass, certainly you can definitely, So, yeah,
Do you
Pat.
have anybody in this seminary now that?
Yes, so there are 2. So actually, at the same, I should have mentioned this, at the same ceremony on the 22nd, 2 men will be ordained as transitional deacons. So normally those are 2 separate ordinations, but they're doing both together. So there'll be actually 4 people being ordained, 2 as deacons, 2 as priests, meaning the 2 ordained as deacons will be ordained as priests, God willing, next year. So they are 2 guys that have been in the program for some time now. They're studying out in St. Paul's Seminary in Minnesota. So they haven't been around here too much, but and then below them, there are some of the neo-catechumenal seminarians, but excluding them, just our guys from here. There's, I think, I want to say right now, currently, I'm getting confused because there's some guys that are entering in this fall, but suffice to say, there's 5 or 6 guys, including the guys who will be coming in, who are below them. And we're hoping that there's going to be more, even potentially this fall. It's a little bit, you never quite know until the fall starts because things can happen. So, but at least there's definitely some potential for there to be some guys entering in this fall, and a good number. So it should be great. So, but something to definitely pray for. We're already praying for it every Sunday, but so it goes without saying. So excellent. So why don't we jump into our text here? So we are in Ephesians 5, verse 21. Hopefully we had a good, I think, preliminary discussion of this passage last week. But I mentioned last week that, hopefully everybody had some time to go back, look at it, pray with it, even do some research. Some of you have come to me independently and mentioned that you did a little reading of certain things and found some good insight from it. So we can jump back in. So I think it's best, again, to read through the passage. Just let it speak to us first, and then just open it up and see what we're thinking. So does somebody want to read for us? Again, this is chapter 5, verses 21, and we'll go all the way through 33 again. Anybody want to read that for us? Start us off here. Peter? Okay.
Be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, be subject to your husbands, as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. As the church is subject to Christ, so let wives also be subject in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by washing her of water with the word, that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot, or wrinkle, or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Even so, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no man ever hates his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, and I mean in reference to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband.
Thank you. So I'll just reiterate a couple of things we talked about last time, just briefly, before we kind of jump back in. We talked about, I think towards the end of last time, we talked about the very end of this passage, right around verses 31 and 32, where Paul is presenting, as we talked about, this very wonderful image of marriage, right? That marriage is not just, any old arrangement of two people, right? But it makes present in the world the marital covenant, right, between man and wife, makes present in the world the love of Christ for his church. And that's why he refers to this as a great mystery. We talked about how, one of the things we refer to as mysteries in our faith, right? The mystery of God, the mystery of the Trinity, the mystery of Christ, the mystery of the church. Marriage is also one of these mysteries, right? Meaning it's something that obviously we know something of, but there's also part of it that transcends our capacity to know, because it's of God, right? It has this divine institution, as he says here in verse 31, referencing the book of Genesis. So marriage has this great power to make present in the world the love that Christ has for the church, which is represented, of course, by the cross, right? Jesus laying his life down for us. So that's one thing we talked about. Other things we talked about, going back to the beginning part of this passage, is, what is Paul trying to do here, right? He's getting to the end of the letter. He turns to these practical things usually at the end of the letter, things about the community, about the household, how we're supposed to live among one another. And the framing kind of verse for this whole passage is verse 21. Be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. I mentioned that the word in Greek there for be subject literally refers to order. Taxonomy is where we get the word in English from the Greek word, meaning having the right kind of order within our own household, our nation, our state, our town, and then our own household as well. And when we have that right order, everything kind of can function properly. And so the first thing, of course, he takes on is the household itself, the relationship between man and wife, and eventually he'll bring in chapter 6, children as well. anyone have anything they want to share that maybe they, thought about or prayed about or read about based on this, or if they want to, reference back things that we talked about last time? Dennis.
Well, Paul in another book says he's not as strong. He's not as strong about this.
Mm.
In Colossians, he goes, "Wives, be subordinate to your husbands, but as is proper in the Lord. Then husbands, love your wives. Children, obey your parents and everything, for this is pleasing to the Lord. And fathers, don't provoke your children." So I don't know if it's a problem with the translations or what. It seems like in every book, or at least two books, one is kind of stronger than the other about the Christian family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dennis, that's good to bring in another Pauline text. So Dennis was citing Colossians chapter 3, verses 18 through 21. Colossians, if you want to look at that yourself, if you're in Ephesians, obviously, you just flip past Ephesians to Philippians, then you flip past that to Colossians. It's only a few pages. So that's in Colossians chapter 3, verses 18 through 21. So yeah, I mean, going off your point, there are, just like on anything, there's going to be slight maybe differences in how Paul presents these teachings to different communities because of the fact that these different communities were different and had different struggles. Maybe some of them struggled with this more than others. And so in some cases he might, it might be presented in more, not as a, more concise, let's say, of a fashion. But yeah, what does he say there in Colossians 3? Wives, be subject to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. So that's very similar to what we just saw. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Very similar to what we just saw. Children, obey your parents and everything, for this pleases the Lord. I see this as really, it's almost as if he's taking everything that was in Ephesians and just summarizing it in one line. Like everything he just said about wives in Ephesians can be summarized by verse 18 in Colossians. Everything he said about husbands in verse 19.
These were two texts not written by Paul.
So that's
and they might have been letters that were being sent out to the general community.
So that's certainly one of, that's certainly a suggestion by certain scholars that, for instance, these would not be genuine Pauline writings. The tradition, of course, holds the opposite, and we do. That's why when we read these at Mass, right, we say a reading from the letter of St. Paul as opposed to just a letter of. But there certainly are some who would claim that. But any thoughts on this or anything else that people want to talk about?
In reading this,
Yeah.
I tried to substitute the word support for where submit appears, and it didn't quite take. But it was clear that Paul is getting at something more than just the ordinary pagan understanding of the culture of the time. Where it is possible in that interpretation, the wife was merely an appendage of the husband, and she just existed to do whatever he told her to do.
Mm.
In this case, Paul is making it clear that there should be equality of communication, and even if not exact equality, nevertheless, he has to listen. The husband ought to listen to what the wife has to say and let his judgment be influenced by that if what she says is convincing.
Mm.
So it was a departure from what most of the people in that part of the world at that time understood the marital relationship to be.
Mm.
But he is describing as something better.
Mm.
That's right. Women didn't have any freedoms, right? They didn't have any rights in those days.
And that's why this is a good point. It's an excellent point, to think about what the context is at the time in the non-Christian community, right? Meaning the majority of the people that lived in these areas at this time, how were they living marriage, right? And so this, in many ways, when we read it from our own perspective, we could say, oh, this seems, antiquated to us, right? But at their time, this would have been actually very revolutionary in the sense that it would have been going against the practice of marriage in society, right? To give a role to the wife of, like you said, there still is that sense of, the husband is the head of the wife, obviously, as is said here in verse 23. But at the same time, the role that the wife has in this union is not just one of total subservience. Yeah.
They were treated more like slaves, I think.
Mm.
That's what a marriage was.
Mm-hmm. And also, certainly, there wasn't a sense of what he's talking about in verse 32, which is that marriage is this wonderful, union that, represents the divine in some way. It would have, like a lot of people think of marriage today, it would have been, sort of just a civil arrangement kind of thing that doesn't really have that kind of force, let's say. Yeah, Pat, go ahead.
Go back to the original
Mm-hmm.
Vulgate,
Mm-hmm.
verse 21. It makes a very big difference, I maintain.
Mm-hmm.
We were just read, I think, the RSV. If I'm not, did you do the RSV?
I believe
Anyway, which is be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, the translation from the Vulgate is being subject one to another in the fear of Christ. One to the other. I mean, and that's the springboard for what some people may be thinking are troubling passages to come. But I think the key thing you said is context. You can't just pluck a verse and get wigged out about it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand. And the last thing I want to say is
Mm-hmm.
that the next line refers to head. And I have a note in my St. Ignatius commentary. It goes on for many paragraphs about what head meant at that time.
Mm.
And it has its roots in Genesis based on the word source. And Eve came from Adam. So the man is the source of life to the woman. That's our history. So it's amazing actually that it traces back to that. Now you wouldn't understand that again if you're just literally reading the verse, but plumb a little more, and I think the meaning becomes more clear.
Mm-hmm. I also think to go off of what you said there, yeah, the use of the word head, I think, is very important and meaningful because, again, it goes back to so many things that have come up throughout this letter and throughout Paul's letters, the use of this image of the body, right? The parts of the body, working together as one body. So even viewing this as, it's not like, authority is some kind of impersonal kind of relationship or it's this kind of, imposition, but to view it as a body, right? The parts of a body in a certain sense. And that goes back, obviously, as you mentioned, to Genesis, to the narrative of the creation of Adam and Eve. And that goes off of also what Peter brought up last time, that definitely behind this passage here in Ephesians is Genesis, the Genesis narrative, right? And so he's taking from that he literally cites from Genesis later on, in verse 31. So clearly that's behind a lot of what he's talking about. But yeah, just to I think affirm what you said about this use of the word head, giving that it gives a certain sense to this structure of authority that's more, let's say, personal, let's say more, even communal, like in a community, right? The head of the community in our, church would be, the one who stands in the person of Christ, right? Who is the head of the community. But that's not as if he is, like we heard in the gospel today, lording over his authority or imposing his authority, right? There's a certain kind of familial dynamic to that authority. And the same thing in the household, in the Christian household. Yes, there is an authority structure, certain taxonomy that has to be observed, but it's a familial kind of authority and a familial kind of community, not one in which one is lording over the other.
It's also, just to follow up on that, head of the man or the husband as head of the household is the mirror of Christ as head of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it significant. That makes it profound.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's a mystery. It's
Yeah.
a sacrament. I mean, again, you go through and you end up, and I think it's the great line at the end. This is a great sacrament, but I speak in Christ and in the church. So without the reference to the church,
Exactly.
You're not going to grasp the significance of it.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, by taking selective passages, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
You're really missing.
Which is why, just like going off what you just said, this is why the church, we are so adamant about, sometimes people say, oh, why is the church so adamant about, Catholics have to observe the marriage laws of the church, meaning being married within the church, right? Because we see it as there's so much going on here that's more than just, that it's making present this relationship with Christ in the church, and therefore it has a great dignity, and we have to reverence this great gift of marriage by, following these prescriptions the church gives us in order to have marriage lived out in the way it should be. Did you want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what you said about Genesis to the wedding that is going to occur. Because if we think about the picture, Adam and Eve were the first married couple. They were the first married couple, and that marriage didn't turn out very good. So Jesus came along to marry his bride. He came down here and went up to his bride, and his bride said, nah, not interested. And he died on the cross preparing his new bride, the Gentiles, for when the end comes, when the final wedding will happen, and his bride will then be prepared. She'll be ready, willing, and that will be the culmination of the first wedding from Adam and Eve that didn't work, to the new wedding, which will be the new Adam and his body, the church.
Yes.
With the Blessed Mother, who's already up there. She's part of it. She's one of us. So it would be the new. So the first wedding to the second wedding, which is coming. And she's getting prepped before her wedding. Because the other bride wasn't interested. Yeah.
That's a wonderful summary of the theology of marriage. What's so interesting about this too is, and this again shows you why marriage is a great mystery and why it's so important for us as Catholics. It's hidden everywhere, we might say, throughout the scriptures, right? From the very beginning to the very end, right? The consummation of our life as Christians in heaven. There's all this spousal, as we say, imagery, right? The wedding feast of the Lamb, as we hear in the scriptures, right? But also looking at marriages in particular, as you mentioned, that's a very good summary of what we believe as Christians about marriage, right? So marriage, obviously, is a sacrament of the church, but it's not as if Jesus, when he came to earth, founded marriage, right? Marriage was founded from the very beginning, as we hear in Genesis. This is the exact line that Paul cites, right? For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is what we call the foundation of marriage as a natural institution from the very beginning, from Adam and Eve onward. But as you mentioned, you look through the Old Testament, the vision that God had for marriage, which is this line, right? Man and woman come together as one flesh, like indissolubility of marriage between one man and one woman, right? The great ideal that God had for marriage, because of the sinfulness and the weakness of human beings, as we see throughout the Old Testament, it was totally marred, and many practiced polygamy, right? Or they didn't observe the indissolubility of marriage, right? Moses allowed for divorce to take place because of the weakness, as Jesus says, of people, right? So that what was this ideal that was presented in Genesis got kind of marred, and it wasn't really practiced as it should be. When Jesus comes, he, as we say, takes this natural institution and raises it now to the level of a sacrament in the church, right? Which is to say, he cleanses and purifies and renews marriage and gives us the sacrament of marriage in the church as the model of exactly what God was referring to in Genesis, right? He brings it back to where it should be. So that's kind of what I think Paul is doing here. Is he's saying, yes, this was founded back in Genesis, right? God gave this to humanity, right, as a great gift. But there's been a lot of different, mistreatments of this, even in the culture. Going back to your point, in the culture of the day, right? In the pagan culture, they were taking this gift and weren't using it as it should be used, right? So Jesus is saying, Paul is saying, Jesus is saying through him, right, in this passage, this is what it should look like, right? This is the ideal. This is God now coming through Jesus to raise us to the level of the sacrament of the church and to give us the real ideal of what marriage should be. Other thoughts? Yeah, Dennis?
When I look at life today, you don't really see this in Christian marriages. I don't really see many couples living like their spouse is a bride. Their bride is like Jesus' relationship to the church is. And in modern times, there's very few people getting married in church. And I don't know how we can change this right away. I mean, it's other than through prayer. It seems like so many, with the issues of sexuality and pornography and all that, so many marriages have broken up, and the people aren't staying committed to their vows, especially when there's children involved. They still get divorced. So I mean, I have two brothers who are divorced. One was divorced twice. So, and then they had children by the second marriage. So. And I'm not even sure if all of them are receiving the sacraments. I mean, like that, me being on the outside, I can tell them, I could suggest, but I can't force them. So.
Any thoughts on? Dennis makes some great points. Any thoughts on that? Anybody wants to share?
From what I hear, I have friends who moved south, and they talk about the vitality of the Catholic Church in the South. The churches filled. And all of that, and I know I've experienced that when I go visit, but you can't judge anything just because you've gone, you think, well, it must be a great day, church is full, but they're telling me it's really, really alive, and that but with the new bishop, one of his goals, I think is so important to this, is reigniting the schools, Catholic schools for children. Now, as a sister, I taught Rhode Island and so on, such a notion of, in the 1970s where everybody left, the schools closed, the sisters decided they didn't want to teach. And in my own family, I can look back at my nieces and nephews who are in their 50s, 40s, whatever. They are so ignorant of any of the church's teachings. For years here, and I'm sure everywhere in the country, they met with some wonderful person who tried to help but wasn't trained in, catechetics themselves, really. So for me, I think I'm hoping we have a new bishop who cites his number one goal is to have preschools for, Catholic schools for teaching. And I think if he goes another step and aligns the annual fund with some of those needs. I mean, I'm one of the people who constantly wrote, I thought this was going to be for Catholic things, not giving to addiction, the annual fund. That's getting millions of dollars from the state and federal governments. I mean, we pay taxes. We get millions into Connecticut from the government. We don't get millions from anybody for Catholic schools. So I'm hoping, just hoping, that with his goal of reinstituting Catholic schools, whether they're going to be in areas or whatever. I mean, it's a wonderful undertaking. I'm right there praying and then realigning the money so people would see it as something really important. There's been whole generations that have not been exposed to Catholic teaching. They're going to happen. And then when you're an aunt or a godmother, we talked about this at the beginning. Remember we had to talk about the sacrament, baptism. You can't make people who haven't been brought up with this do things just because we think it's right. So I really think that's a big step that's going to happen. And as I said, people tell me, and I lived in Kentucky for 3.5 years on business, and the church then was so alive back in the 80s and 90s, really alive. I was one of the workers in what they call tech for teenagers, Teens Encounter Christ. And it was just unbelievable what was happening there. So I'm hoping that we could get revved up a bit here. Am I crazy? Does anybody else feel that way? I feel new life with this bishop. I'm praying maybe.
I agree. I agree, but the only thing is, like you said, if they don't have the faith, you can't teach faith. That's a gift.
But you can bring people to be exposed.
You can expose them.
And we have nothing terribly to expose. Right. I would be thrilled now to bring people, but couldn't possibly. But coming here.
What are they going to do with all these schools they closed? They're going to reopen them?
Well, I would get, okay, I know nothing but what you know, but I'm guessing as a teacher, somebody who had to deal, one of my jobs was doing all the budgets, like our school and everything, it costs millions to run one school. It really does. But I think maybe they're going to have area schools. Do you know what I mean? You can't obviously go back and put that if there are 40 parishes, you can't have 40 schools, you know?
Yeah.
We do have some private schools, don't we, follow in the archdiocese, like St. Bridget's?
Yes, there are some schools that are, private enterprises, but that, obviously are.
But they had a wonderful thing happening for years, and then it got broken apart. And that was when the Mercy Sisters turned over their church school in Madison.
Yep.
There were lay people wanting to pick it up, and they were not allowed to do that. Prior to that event, St. Margaret Mary's and St. George's, both are very wealthy churches, were supporting that school. I could not believe when I heard that was going to be dismembered, because they were paying for everything. If there were parishes that were thrilled with it, the kids would come visit those. My family was there, and I went to church sometimes out there too. But it was already a working thing. 2 parishes came together and took over all the expenses, and it got kneecapped. So maybe things like that.
Yeah, we'll see some of those in the future. Joanne, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah. I agree with both what Dennis and Pat are saying. We need good catechesis. That's just fundamental. However, if we don't have good catechesis in the domestic church, in the families, to Dennis's point about marriages, right? You could have great CCD programs and catechetical programs, but those kids go home and mom and dad aren't really living their faith, and they're letting sports take priority over mass or all the other things that can interfere, then it's really difficult for a good Catholic school or anywhere else it's a really difficult thing. And I think, the key is strengthening marriages. And I think that maybe comes from people who are, especially young people who are living a really good Catholic marriage, to be able to model that for other young people, to encourage other young married couples, invite them over for dinner, let them see what it means to be a part of a Catholic family, with all the ups and downs and the struggles with the kids and whatever, but letting faith be the fundamental thing. So I think maybe as much as we need to reach the kids, we need to reach the young married couples. We need to help them to understand how important their faith is to them as a couple, and how important their faith is to them as a family. And so it's not one easy, simple solution. It's the whole big picture. But Dennis is right. We need somehow to strengthen the marriages themselves.
Yeah, on this point, there's a comment that came in that's very related to what you just said, something hopeful. In the midst of kind of what we're talking about. Maura says, she says, a lot of it's a matter of perspective. She said she knows a lot of young adult couples that are living a beautifully rich and faithful life, and in this way have a holy domestic church, to use the word that you just mentioned. So she says, maybe they're not necessarily, tons of them as we'd hope, but they do exist. And these younger couples can be that model for others. And also going off that point, so there's a new, because a lot of these things circle around marriage preparation. How are couples prepared for the sacrament? How are they receiving ongoing formation, we might say, as they are entering into this marriage covenant? And one of the aspects of marriage preparation that isn't really practiced too often now, including with us, but is something that we're going to roll out soon, is having mentor couples to be able to provide this role. Especially at our parish, we're blessed that we have so many young couples that are very strong in their faith, or even older couples that are very strong in the faith. It doesn't matter the age, right? And they could provide that kind of guidance in a way that the priest obviously needs to be there to provide a lot of guidance as well during the preparation process. But there's also a huge role for couples that are living this, and that become, again, to use this very important phrase, become a domestic church. You might have heard that before. You may have not. What does that mean? It means that the household, Pope John Paul II was big on referring to this, but obviously this is part of the tradition of the church, much long before him as well. But he spoke about the domestic church, right? The home, the household. And this goes back, I think, exactly to Ephesians 5, right? The home is to be a church, right? A domestic church, meaning the place in which, the first place in which the children learn about the faith, right? When they're growing up as small children, and then eventually are entrusted to, schools and religious education programs in the parish to learn more and to receive the sacraments. But the first place they're receiving that formation is in this domestic church in the home. And so that's why, going off your point, all of your points, it's so important to have that be truly a church, right? To envision the household as a type of church. I think a lot of times we don't think that, but that should be our way of thinking so that we can prepare children well to continue their journey of discipleship.
We have a family of 8 kids that come here all the time, the Hunter family.
Yes.
I've known them since I knew their parents. Born.
Yeah.
There are 2 or 3 other large groups that come in from Meriden and Wallingford as well. And they're in the same predicament we all are now. They don't, have special, they're doing homeschooling as a matter of fact. And so the parents have gotten really involved, some of them with the Franciscans and whatever. So, yeah, it's all necessary. But we have to have a feeling of life again. What they're talking about in the South, I hear that all the time. It's so alive, and you walk in, everybody's excited to be there. I mean, I remember that from my youth, but I'm old.
Dennis, do you want to say something?
Well, sometimes in church you get distracted by these little kids that are going up and down the aisles. And I know certain priests and parents have their favorites, but it's really a bother thing. I get bothered by it because I'm trying to worship and then these kids are making all kinds of noise. But, it's probably a good thing that they're getting exposed to the faith. And I give the parents credit for going through this. And I'm sure they know that many of the parishioners are probably thinking things bad about them. But then on the other point, how many of you know people, Catholic families, that say grace before meals? I don't know of any. I mean, I'm always asked to say the grace, but if I'm not there, I don't think they say grace.
Do you say it when you go out in a restaurant when you're with a friend?
I say it to myself.
We say it out loud now, friends and I.
Oh, you do?
Not loud, but we say the words verbally. And even when I'm alone now, I started that. I finally had the courage to do that just by myself. Every time I eat out alone, I bless myself. And even if a waitress comes up, they wait until I'm through. But, you're right, those are the things that, those things all that
It's got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, it's all part of domestic church, right? Teaching your children to pray before meals, teaching them all the little gifts that we have as the Catholic faith. So my 5 kids, they'll, with all their families, pray the grace before meals. We're blessed to have 27 grandkids and 2 more in the womb. And I have 5, married kids. And I don't want to ever take it for granted, pray for them all the time. But my children are teaching their kids, they're not just living their Catholic faith, it's like a daily, it's like everything. It's all of what their lives are. But so 2 things. Number 1, praying before meals. I remember years ago, when my kids were little, reading an article where the person said that if they were at a restaurant and they saw a family praying grace before their meal at the restaurant, they would pay for their meal.
Really?
How come they aren't there when I'm because I thought that was a really beautiful thing, right? But it highlights the point that they rarely saw people pray at a restaurant. So, the beauty of that. And then also to Dennis's point about the distractions or the difficulty of praying when children are being disruptive at church. And I think there's a couple of things, like we would always, work with our kids to not be disruptive. So it's one thing if you've got to kind of let them have a free-for-all. And it's another thing if you're struggling as a parent to try to help them to know proper behavior in church. I think that that work needs to be done, right? So if they're going to be, cry or be disruptive, whatever, and hopefully the parents are guiding them in the proper behavior in church. But one time I was at a church at the Basilica in Washington, D.C., and my son was a baby, and he just got really, started crying and fussing. And I took him out, and staying in the back of the church. And afterwards, when Mass ended, this gentleman came up to me, and I thought, oh, here it comes. This person's going to be really upset that my son was crying during Mass. And what this gentleman said to me was just truly the most beautiful thing. Because he said, there was a time in my life when I would just get so upset with these crying, fussy kids in church, and oh my gosh, I can't concentrate and I can't pray. And then he said, and all of a sudden one day it hit me that this Mass is the representation of Christ on the cross. And when he was there, it wasn't quiet. It was wailing and weeping and crying and sorrow. And then he realized that in those moments when he was most distracted by his kids, he could unite that to the real suffering and everything that was happening at the time. And I was like, it was the most beautiful thing anybody ever said to me about a crying kid at church. So
I really like that. I've never heard that.
yeah, so
That's
I leave
great.
that with you.
Yeah.
And plus Christ said, bring the children to me.
Yes.
Yeah, suffer the little children. to come
And
on
we also
board.
just got a comment in on this point. That's another great line that I've never heard before. A church that isn't crying is dying.
That's what I said. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, so that's right. There you
Yeah, the church
go.
isn't crying, they're dying.
Yeah. So there you go. Yeah, a lot of nice things to think of next time we may be in that situation, where myself included, because you know I've got to preach a homily and there's a kid screaming in your face. No, it's great though. It's excellent. It's excellent. Yeah. So, but it's true. I mean, exactly what Joanne just said, but exactly what this comment says too. That we, I always try to go out of my way too to say something to the parents, because they might feel a little bit, and to say to them, thank you for being here. Thank you for, it's such a wonderful thing, because that's the future of the church. That's the life of the church. And also, in some way, even if the child is very young, they're becoming acclimated to the church and they're becoming more familiar with our faith. So we certainly commend that. So yeah, Jocelyn.
Something that I actually just thought of, during the masses, I noticed that, I believe before, you do Eucharist, you actually come down from the altar and you bless all the kids that come up.
Yes, so at the 11 a.m. Mass on Sunday at St. Mary's, we do a children's blessing. It's something that has been done here for some time after communion, for of course for the children who aren't able to receive because they haven't made their first communion yet. So it's a way for them. Most of them receive a blessing already as they come in the line, so they're getting sort of a second blessing. But the reason that's done is also it's a witness thing. It's them receiving the blessing, obviously, but it's also so that the community can see the children that are here.
So wonderful that you do
Yeah.
that. See all the kids run up.
Yeah. There's a gentleman who always, he counts how many kids are there. And so every Sunday he'll come up to me after and go, today there were this many or this many. And he's like amazed by it. And that's the whole point of it, is meant to be, it's meant to kind of, yeah. So did you want to say, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm listening to all this, I'm
Yeah.
thinking about the children in the church,
Mhm.
of which there are many where I'm in choir. I mean, it's bursting at the seams of the traditional mass. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. It's wonderful. So there's a lot of noise.
Mhm.
But their mere presence, they're receiving God's grace.
Mhm.
That's the key thing. So as far as their formation in the faith, that's key,
Mhm.
their presence.
Mhm. Yes, I agree with that. I mean, when I was growing up in Newington, they had, I think it was, I don't think exists too much today. Maybe it does, but they had like a children's liturgy, they would call it. So basically, they would take all the children downstairs, even the older children too, and we would go downstairs into the church hall, and basically they would read like a children's translation of the scriptures, and then we do like some kind of activity and everything. And the philosophy of it was, okay, here's a way to present this to the children, a way they can understand. But then I also thought, and even I felt as a kid, then you're not present with your family and you're not present during the liturgy. So it kind of takes, at least I thought it took some away from the value of having the family be together and be present, and to be present for the Eucharist itself, right? And so I think in a lot of cases now we're moving more towards, for instance, what we do, which is you have the children present, and then you do have something that maybe is kind of directed towards them, like a blessing or something like that, to highlight their presence, but also to have them there and have the family be one, right? So it's sort of like going off of what Ephesians is talking about, right? To become that domestic church, and then the whole domestic church, the household, comes into the church and is present there and is receiving grace and is strengthened, so that they can go back into their home, their household, and make that more and more into a domestic church.
Yeah, well, getting back to this for a minute.
Yeah.
Paul says Christ loves the church. That's his bride. So if a man loves his wife and a wife respects her husband, that's equal.
Mm.
So if you did an algebraic equation,
In terms of the love that is expected, exactly, yeah. In terms of the love that's one thing that I want to get over here too, before I won't forget to call on you, but verse 25, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. We could read through that pretty quickly, like, oh, love your wife. But he's saying, how did Christ love the church, right? By dying on the cross, right? And suffering, pretty much the worst death you could imagine, right? So that's the way you're supposed to love your, So it's obviously a very high bar and a high calling to love as we're called to, which is self-sacrificial always, right? And so in terms of the love we're called to give, obviously the husband gives in that way, and the wife obviously in return gives her love, as the church is called to love Christ in return. So, yeah. And then I'm going to go over here.
What you were describing,
Yeah.
I'm going to cut it to the crisp,
Yeah.
is sacrificial love. It's not about me. It's about giving. It's about loving. It's about building up.
Mm-hmm.
And in reference to John Paul's reference to the domestic church, that's the smallest unit. That's the cells of the body
Mm-hmm.
of the church,
Mm-hmm.
is the family. The only other comment I wanted to make, and I think this is a very important distinction in the understanding of marriage, it's not a contract, it's a covenant, which means it's meant to be indissoluble.
Mm-hmm.
Forever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's lost in our culture as
That's
well.
the first thing I say.
Permanence.
Yeah.
Weathering the storms. It is a sacrifice for the greater good. The greater good, your soul and the salvation of your husband and your husband, wife, and children, the witness you give to others, and your contribution to the body of Christ, the church.
That's the first thing I say in the marriage prep. The first meeting, first thing we talk about is covenant versus contract.
Good.
Right? Because that's a good way of envisioning what it is that the sacrament of marriage in the church is. And again, it goes right back to Genesis, when the marriage covenant is founded, right? For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, right? So people say, where do we get this idea of indissolubility? It comes from God's ideal for marriage, right? To become one flesh, then you're going to, there's indissolubility is part of that ideal for marriage, and therefore it's something that we obviously are very firm on. And Jesus himself was very firm on too. I do want to go over here because you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just want to ask,
Yeah.
what is the church's teaching on prenups, on getting prenups before marriage?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
That's an excellent question. So,
And I just wanted to say something about how very important it is to continue the catechesis about marriage, because most young people, everything we know about marriage is gotten from YouTube, all those marriage advisors, and even divorce lawyers giving you ideas on how to make your marriage work. So it's also be nice to hear from people like you who have had successful marriages.
yes.
I also wanted to ask, like in situations where it's very clear that the husband no longer loves the wife, does the wife continue to respect the husband, or is she given that opportunity to actually like separate, like move away from the marriage? And she also says something about marriage being a covenant. What if in a situation where it's very obvious that the two people involved do no longer want this covenant to continue? Like, do they have the power to actually dissolve the covenant, since like it's a covenant between two people? So these are the questions.
Excellent questions. So the first one first, I mean, they're all kind of related. So if I answer the first one, it will kind of get towards the others. And then also I'd like to think the second thing you said is important to have those who are in good, healthy marriages to speak about that as well. We'll probably get up on time just with me answering your first question. But so with regard to prenuptial agreements, right? This actually is something that came up in, it sort of was a little bit of a viral issue recently because like you said, there's a lot of these talks today and podcasts about, entering into marriage and what it should look like, and you should get a prenup, you shouldn't, whatever. Strictly speaking, they're not necessarily out of bounds for a Catholic couple. I mean, the way that they would be out of bounds, meaning they would actually affect the validity of the marriage, would be if they were to suggest that the couple is not giving full and conscious consent to an indissoluble union with each other, right? Which, if in some cases, certain prenuptial agreements could be sort of let's say, moving against that full consent, because you're essentially saying, oh, I give consent, but under these kind of stipulations, right? And if for some reason this doesn't happen, then, right? So that would be reason to doubt that one or both of the parties is actually giving full consent. Now, there's certain arrangements in which there could be some kind of agreement made that's not it's not in some way harming their full consent. In that case, it would be it could be something that could be allowed, but generally speaking, it would not be, because it would be essentially one or both parties saying, yeah, I really don't fully, sort of treating it like a contract rather than a covenant, right? There are contractual elements to the covenant of marriage, right? But it's not simply a contract, so it can't just be treated as a contract would be, which is like, okay, here's my part, there's your part, 50-50, and then we'll make this work out. And we'll put an escape clause in the contract in case something doesn't work out, or we'll change the contract up if something doesn't work out, or we'll void the contract, right? Those are all things that can be done with a contract. That's where some of those prenuptial agreements would enter in. But when we're talking about a covenant, right, it's not something, it's not 50-50, it's all in, right? Total gift of self, one to the other. And so once that is contracted, it is, and comes right from the mouth of Jesus, right? He says in the Gospels, right? What God has joined together, let no man put asunder, right? So once that marriage bond, the sacrament, the covenant of marriage is contracted, it is indissoluble. So it cannot be dissolved except by the death of one of the parties. So the only situation in which a covenantal bond of marriage could be, it could never be dissolved except by death, right? There could be a situation in which this is what an annulment is. It's not, some people think about it as Catholic divorce, right? But it's not that, right? It's not the divorce or the dissolution of a bond. It's the church coming to the determination that no bond existed in the first place because one or both of the parties in some way was unable to or unwilling to give full and complete consent to the other person. So what contracts the marriage bond in the church is the two parties coming together, giving full and conscious consent to a lifelong union as the church understands it. That's all that's needed for in the presence of the church, the church's minister, obviously witnessing. So, I always say to the couples too, the other thing I say to them is, on the marriage day, something unique is going to happen. It's the one sacrament in the church where the minister of the sacrament, the one who performs the sacrament, is not actually the clergy person, right? The priest or the bishop. It's actually the couple, right? So the couple, man and wife, coming forward, giving full, complete consent to the other person, that contracts that. So long as that exists, right? And that's why in the marriage prep process, there's a lot of, we do a lot of conversations and questions about some of these issues, because the whole idea is, are you prepared to make this full and conscious decision, right, to give consent to the other? Because once you do that on your wedding day in the presence of the church's minister, right, in the presence of the community, that contracts a marriage bond that's indissoluble. So going to your other questions, yes, in the Catholic Church, if you're married in the Catholic Church, right, indissoluble bond, then that isn't dissolved, even if if there's emotional situations or a lack of love or difference of opinions on certain things, right? The bond perdures. The only situation where we might look to like for an annulment for in a certain situation is if somebody really has a belief that this person really didn't give full consent or couldn't, or was, for instance, sometimes if people are hiding certain information, that could be grounds for because they weren't giving full consent, or the other person didn't have full knowledge to give full consent. So that's just kind of a preliminary answer to a lot of your questions, but this goes to the heart of what we believe about marriage as Catholics. Did you want to follow up with anything or anything you wanted to say, or did you want to go here?
Yeah. Say that, so then assuming that we have a valid contractual marriage, an indissoluble marriage, and then in the future, something really bad happens, like, one spouse is physically abusing the other spouse.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that their marriage, that they don't have a marriage, but it might mean that for the safety of the children or the spouse, they need to live separately from each other. And even in that case, a civil divorce could be okay, right, from a legal point of view of monies and other things, but they're not free to marry anybody else. If they understand the teachings of the church, then they still understand that they are in a lifelong marriage. But for safety reasons, maybe they can't live with each other again. And, in the marriage vow, we say for better or worse. Well, that's a pretty worse thing. It's a pretty worse thing when someone says, I don't love you anymore, right? And yet we made this vow that we would commit to this person and work towards the salvation of their soul for better or worse, no matter what the worst is. So maybe we can't remain together physically in the same house, but we would still be married. As long as marriage was there from the beginning, it is until one of them dies.
And that's a good, an excellent summation of sort of the practical or the pastoral advice that sometimes is given in certain situations, where there might be a situation where, the marriage bond perdures and it's there, but because of the situation and the safety of different parties, for instance, common life might not be good, or separation even in certain cases might be, really needed. So any other kind of comments, or we're just over time, but this is a big subject. So if everybody wants to,
so marriage is really a contract. This covenant idea is really the ideal that most people don't attain. And besides that, an annulment is a break of the contract. Now, you can phrase it any way you want. It's a break in the contract. The church is allowing the two people to move aside and go on living their own lives. The other thing is they sign a contract with the state.
Yes. So that's why I mentioned
it's really a contract.
Well, no, that's why I mentioned this is the important distinction. There are contractual elements to marriage, certainly, always, right? There's certainly a contractual elements. That's why it's the church, it's by law, by canon law and civil law. I can't just marry somebody without them having a civil marriage license, right? So there has to be a civil, especially in our country, civil and religious. So there's contractual elements, certainly. But that doesn't mean that marriage is simply a contract. Look at what we're. I mean, this goes back to our reading today. Look at what Paul is saying about marriage. Look at what God says about marriage from the beginning. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Is that a contract? That's a full gift of.
It's the ideal, but in today's society, people aren't able to live up to this. There's too many problems between marriages.
Well, that's why it is
allowing them to divorce.
So, and going back to the other point, so annulment isn't though a divorce, because again, there's nothing that's being broken or dissolved. It's the recognition that there was nothing in the first place. So it's important to maintain that distinction, because otherwise we fall into the trap of saying, oh, this is just the church saying that you can get a divorce, you can get, you can dissolve this. The reason, and again, going back to why, some might say, why are we so, Catholics so big on this point? I mean, I just flip back to Matthew 19. So I'll just read through it. Matthew, if you want to read through it yourself, Matthew 19, verse 3 and onward. The Pharisees came up to Jesus and tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? Because, of course, they were thinking back to the Old Testament where Moses had allowed for divorce to take place, right? Mm-hmm. He answered, have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, this is the passage that Paul cites, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. So they are no longer two, but one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man put asunder. They said to him, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? So why did Moses allow this if wasn't the what God wanted? He said to them, for your hardness of heart Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So it goes back to the words of Jesus himself that, the indissolubility of marriage and this ideal of marriage. Now, going back to your point about ideal versus, certainly there's a sense in which, marriage in the Catholic Church is, the fullest ideal of what God desires for marriage. But, and this goes for the current practice of the church today, even, for instance, if there's two Protestants who get married, even civilly, if they get civilly married, right? The church still recognizes that as a marriage bond and also recognizes indissolubility in that marriage. So, for instance, if somebody two Protestants were to be married, and this comes up a lot in my case, right? Two Protestants were to be married in a Protestant ceremony, even in a civil ceremony, right? And then, let's say one were to become divorced and want to marry, let's say, a Catholic person who wasn't previously married and is free to marry, right? It's not as if the church just says, you're scot-free from that, the Protestant person is scot-free from his marriage and can simply enter into marriage. No, because we presume the indissolubility of marriage, again, because this is something that from the beginning has been instituted in this way. So again, even in situations where maybe the ideal can't be lived out, we still recognize that marriage is more than just, it has contractual elements, but there's much more to it, going back to what we see in Ephesians. And therefore, but you're right, in today's day and age, most marriages are not being lived according to this ways.
I'm not favoring it. I don't favor it, but
yeah,
I'm trying to be real about it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, what about priests and nuns? They're dispensed from their vocations or vows. The Pope can say you're not a priest.
So this is an excellent point. So
it's the same thing.
This is actually something where this is actually something that's been a big topic of conversation of late. Is that you're right. So when a priest or nun, as we saw on Sunday, makes vows, you make your vows forever, right? You're saying, I vow to do this forever because this is my vocation, right? Mm-hmm. So there's many priests, and this is something that came up in seminary, right? There's many priests who would say, we take that very seriously for, the covenant of marriage, right? The indissolubility of marriage, and we hold people to that very, very closely, right? And yet in the case of, for instance, holy orders or also religious life, there's a difference, right? So it certainly means that, we would desire to hold both to the same standard. But it also goes back to just, something that very clearly comes from the words of Jesus himself. So he very clearly singles out marriage in this way that he doesn't necessarily single out, for instance, other sacraments. Now, it's not to say that, we should be flippant about, somebody leaving holy orders, for instance, or you never leave holy orders since that you're always a priest forever, right? Once you're ordained, and that's how it is, right? But you can be dismissed from the clerical state, meaning you can't function as a priest in a certain situation, but you still remain a priest ontologically. But you're right. I think, at least for priests, right, that's the idea in this day and age is to, certainly try to hold both to the same standard, so that it's a witness to the married
from the seminary who were priests, but because of the sexual abuse thing.
Yeah. And that's one of the big reasons, obviously, that it would be, especially in today's day and age, should be more. We're over. Any last comments or things people want to say? I think we had a good discussion today. I wanted to bring in the children. Next time we'll bring in the children. So chapter 6, we'll bring in the children. And then we have another fun passage, verse 5, if you look down to that. So we'll talk about that as well. So great. So let's pray together. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we give you thanks for your blessings this day and the insights that you have given us. We ask that you help each one of us to come to a greater understanding of our vocation in life. Especially way we ask your blessing upon the married people and married couples here present, that they might always in the world be a sign and symbol of that great covenantal love between Christ and his church. And we pray for all married couples in our parish, those who are discerning marriage in the church, those who are preparing for marriage in the church in our parish, that you might, through your gracious Holy Spirit, continue to bless and strengthen them in their God-given vocation. And we ask your blessing upon all of us as we go forth from here to put into practice the great ideals that we have reflected upon this day. And we pray now together, asking for the intercession of our Blessed Mother. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks, everybody. We got a comment in. I was just saying, really appreciate your willingness. So thank you. Thank you, Pat.